We've done quite a lot of river walks with our community, and today we're tracing the journey of the Fromus from its source at Rotten End all the way to where it meets the River Old. Our rivers are important to us. They're a really good indicator of the state of our biodiversity locally, but also they make up a whole network of rivers, the Old, the Orr, the Deben and the Waveney, that really have created this part of East Suffolk.
It's not inconceivable that there would be subterranean spring lines that would be feeding down, like, as I say, dendricles, looking rather like a delta formation, and then coalescing into the Fromus, of which this may just be one of the main leaders, but possibly no less the source than, let's say, that one, or any other ditch line. So if this one goes round into the woodland, but there's another ditch going up there, then all of these would have been ancient springs that would have fed towards a main channel. Where there were a series of springs, these areas would have been left wooded because they would have been really difficult to harvest, very difficult to cultivate and rotivate, but also would have been recognisable sources of fresh water which was needed by the farmsteads. The Fromus Reserve as we know it now was part of the Kelsale estate. So we're going back to 18th century, 1700s, where they built a large fish pond on the reserve site as we see it now, in order to hold back the water and in order to keep the flow of the river going. They diverted it round the dam wall, which is what we're seeing in these deep gull and ravine here. I would say, looking at it, is anything between 250 to 300 years old. So again, that gives you some idea that there has been a relaxing of land use management since then, where it was then broken down into land units and sold off to local farmers. And so this would then have fallen into disuse. The soil is gradually subsiding into this meadow. And so we're seeing all sorts of vegetation changes. That process is not being helped by the white cattle, which are still allowed onto the bank. We have to imagine where our landscapes come from. They've had a long history of work heritage. I talked about alteration, but how much structural alteration has gone on in rivers, and you don't really see it in all of its modification until you come into towns. And I'm talking specifically about canalisation. And this is the process of taking out the meanders and the natural sinuosity of a river, constraining it and confining it to channels. And this has a huge impact on the channel structure itself. What is the actual impact of that? Well, it actually speeds up water flow. So these are problems and issues that we're only just confronting now. Now we're facing problems of climate change. And so when you look at urban planning in the progressive town councils, you'll find that they are thinking much more about interconnecting green infrastructure with blue infrastructure so that they can work in a much more synchronized, harmonious way. So whenever we do get floods, we can expect those areas to fill out more. That would take the pressure off the channel, but at the same time, it would also alleviate flood water further downstream. So we'd expect to see rather less of it happening in our houses and on our roads.
This is the wet part of the wood, which is today being cut. The reason you cut it is to keep the nutrients at a low level in order for the native plants and the wetland plants to thrive.
I thought it'd be a nice opportunity to take up some of the pigment and the moisture contained in the wad and to make some really gestural waddy marks on the piece of paper.
What we're going to do now is walk under the alder car. The alder car is very interesting. Alder are these wetland trees that are everywhere. And the other thing I wanted to tell people is, we're looking at the cones last time, but here are the male flowers that will be flowering, catkins, which which will be flowering next year. Alder means, car means wetland, wetland where the alder cars live.
Gallery forests describes a ribbon of woodland either side of a river causeway that grows up over time. It's not coppiced or pollarded, and it forms a high crown, so we can see all around us a combination of ash and alder. It sits on the alluvial peat beds of the Fromus. The real bonus of a gallery forest is they keep the water cool, they keep the landscape cool. These are, if you like, the refrigerators of the wider open landscape, and the water quality is contingent on the existence of a good substantial gallery forest. So this tiering of the landscape provides all of those niches and habitats that collectively contributes to the wider biodiversity of both the gallery forest, but then ever more so to the wider landscape. The more wriggles there are in the river, the more you can dissipate the energy of the water that's moving down. So then if you have a flood, it's hitting these meanders, these banks, and it's taking the energy out of the water. So by the time it gets further downstream, it's moderated the whole water flow. So you then don't get that flood effect. That's what we call a eutrophic nitrophilous plant. It likes having its roots in rich eutrophic waters. And then Lemna minor, which is that duckweed, that's a classical indicator of high nitrate, high phosphate levels in water. And then you've got a very healthy bed of conjugate algae. That's that stringed algae that rather looks like green hair. That's another good indicator of high nitrate phosphate levels.
So where we are today is the Snape wetland, and it's all a habitat creation. So we've converted low-lying grazed pasture into a reed bed and wetland with bitterns and marsh harriers and bearded tits and all the other associated wildlife we find in these habitats.
This is a lovely example of what is transported down the river, isn't it?
Yeah, the lightweight
absolutely, yeah.
spread. And these are this year's female flowers combs, which will have been pollinated. That's last year's, which will have shed its seeds.
Right, yeah, okay.
And because this has male and female flowers.
Got you.
So there are catkins, reddish catkins, earlier in the year, which pollinate the female flowers, which are smaller. And they will be developing and becoming cones in this next season. Yeah.
This is the Environment Agency tide flap or gate at the end of the Fromus. So when the River Old on the other side floods, it sort of seals itself off. The Old takes priority over the Fromus. So we have to wait for the River Old to drain away low enough for this tide gate to open and allow the Fromus to drain. Normal function like this, it just is open to trickle all the time. So it's constantly flowing out of the River Fromus, through the gate, out into the Old, to Snape Maltings and into the estuary.
The art station has been engaging our community, all ages, in what's happening with the environment. There's a whole area of work, ideas, thought around how we protect our natural heritage and why it's really important in terms of protecting biodiversity and habitats, and how doing so and coming together is also an amazing opportunity for social contact, for feeling achievement and for getting in touch with nature and ourselves.